Good morning, Cult Nation. Miss Waddell here. Today's date is October 7th, 2020. I hope you guys are having a fabulous week so far, enjoying the cooler weather. It's pretty chilly out there, but I think it's supposed to warm back up, so hopefully you guys are able to get out there and enjoy it. I know that the grading period is ending soon, so make sure that you guys are staying on top of your assignments and getting those things turned in, communicating with your teachers about anything that you might be missing. Just make sure that you're logging onto your Google Classroom so that you guys can make sure that your grades look good when report cards go out, I think next week. So I am going to go ahead and present my screen to you guys. Since last week I made my blooper and forgot to do that until halfway through. So it looks like we are good to go. So today's lesson, gentlemen, is on reframing unhelpful thoughts. And so we have discussed last week about unhelpful thoughts versus helpful thoughts. We discussed the difference between those two and how those thoughts that we have in our head can impact our decisions. Today, we're going to learn how to interrupt those thoughts and reframe them in a way that is helpful. But first, we're going to think of some examples of helpful and unhelpful thoughts. So I'm going to show you on my next screen here, maybe. Imagine that this is happening to you. You just got settled in class when you realize the pencil you put on your desk is now missing. What's one helpful and unhelpful thought that you could have about this situation? So I know that can be frustrating when you are all settled in and you knew you had that pencil up and down. You could have swore that you put it right there. You get up to maybe get a Kleenex or turn something in and you come back and it's gone. What's one unhelpful thought that could be going through your head? So take a second and kind of think about that. An unhelpful thought. So one that I could come up with is that I'm instantly going to become angry and assume that somebody stole it off my desk. And then I'm now arguing with my classmates trying to figure out who took it. Okay? So that would be an unhelpful thought, is that your neighbor took your pencil. So that unhelpful thought led to a negative decision. So I immediately start blaming my classmates. I become angry. And that was a result from an unhelpful thought that somebody stole it. Now let's explore the possibility of a helpful thought. So a helpful thought could be that it rolled off your desk, right? Maybe it rolled off your desk, somebody else needed a pencil, they found one on the floor and they took that one. Okay, that could be a possible helpful thought. Or maybe a helpful thought is, I thought I had a pencil here, I guess I didn't, I need to go get another one. That would be a helpful thought. And that helpful thought is going to lead to a more positive decision that you're making. So instead of disrupting class, you're just going to calmly go up and get another pencil. Okay? With that way of thinking for us to be able to do that. But hopefully by us learning these strategies early on, it's something that we can make a conscious effort and be cognizant of that and be mindful of that so that we can make it a habit. Now I want us to look at how it is that we can interrupt that cycle. So how we can interrupt the cycle of unhelpful thoughts that lead negative decisions so that we have a better chance of making positive decisions. Let's take a look at the cycle that's on the screen over here. If I'm looking at this, and this is just like our flow chart that we did last week, we start off with that strong emotion, okay? That strong emotion leads to an unhelpful thought. That unhelpful thought leads to a negative decision, and that negative decision will lead to a stronger emotion. So just kind of think about it. I'd ask you to raise your hand if we were in person, but I can't see you guys. But just kind of raise your hand if you've ever been caught in that cycle. So I know myself, I've been caught in that cycle where we feel a strong emotion, that unhelpful thought, kind of creeps in. We make that negative decision, and then now we feel a stronger emotion. What are some things that we could do to interrupt this cycle? So I've got some possible ideas. Before I click on this, I want you to kind of think about what are some things that you could do to interrupt that cycle of thinking. And I'll show you what mine are. So some possible ideas are, we're going to calm down. We're going to stop and think. We're going to catch that unhelpful thought and we're going to change it. So those would be some possible ideas, and maybe you guys were able to brainstorm some different ones. But those are the ones that are suggested. So calming down your emotions, stopping and thinking, catch that unhelpful thought and change it. But first, I want to talk about emotion management strategies. Emotion management strategies. And that's earlier in the lesson, back when we very first started this unit on our thoughts, emotions, and feelings, thoughts, and emotions. Sorry, when we very first started this about 3 weeks ago, we talked about that when we manage our strong emotions, our amygdala, remember that's that part of the brain that receives the emotion, our amygdala turns down our feelings alarm, and then our cortex part of the brain has time to catch up and think, and that's what helps us make those decisions. So what emotion management strategies have we already learned in our lessons that we've been doing with each other? Okay, I want you to kind of think about that before I click on them. We've learned some ways the past couple weeks. We've talked about slow breathing, walking away, and counting, and how those are ways that we can get our amygdala to turn down so that the cortex part can help us make a good decision, right? A positive decision. Because remember, it takes longer for that decision-making part to kick on in our brain. Immediately, we feel that emotion, but then there's that delay there for decision-making. So by doing slow breathing, walking away from the situation, counting, those are some strategies for managing our emotions. Now I want you to think about some other emotion management strategies that work for you. And that's going to be something that wasn't discussed yet, but something that you do to calm yourself down. So maybe you go and you play outside, you exercise, you play a sport, and that relieves your stress. Maybe you do puzzles or board games, or you listen to music on your phone. Maybe you have a friend or a family member that you always talk to when you're upset. And those are ways that you calm yourself down. Okay. So we want to focus on reframing unhelpful thoughts. A frame is a way that we look at something. If we look at something through a negative frame, then we're more likely to have unhelpful thoughts. When we change the frame to a more positive one, we can transform those unhelpful thoughts to helpful thoughts. We can choose to look at things from this perspective right here that you see on your screen to this perspective. So reframing your unhelpful thoughts is going to change how it is that you feel. If you are constantly thinking of unhelpful thoughts, this would be a picture that would describe how you feel. You're gloomy, you're upset, you're sad. Versus looking at it from a positive lens that's more peaceful and happy. So reframing those positive decisions is going to help you, or reframing those unhelpful thoughts is going to help you make positive decisions and overall feel happier and not feel so sad and down. To help reframe our thoughts, we can ask ourselves these questions. Am I assuming that something bad will happen? Am I assuming the other person was being intentionally mean? What can I learn from this situation? Those are types of reframing questions. So that when you're having those negative thoughts and negative feelings, you can ask yourself these questions to try to reframe your mindset and get on a more positive track. A lot of times when we look at these questions, am I assuming something bad will happen? Sometimes we think the worst, and then those bad thoughts of thinking the worst become just embedded in our brain and how we always interpret things. And so we're always thinking the worst, so that's definitely affecting our mood, and our mood is affecting our actions. The next one, am I assuming the other person was being intentionally mean? Sometimes people do things and they're not meaning to do it, or they're not meaning it in a way that you have interpreted it. So something could be done and you're thinking that that person did it on purpose. Doing something intentionally means that they're doing it on purpose. When in reality, it could be a misunderstanding and that person actually didn't mean to do it intentionally. Another thought you could ask yourself, or question you can ask yourself, is what can I learn from this situation? So maybe something bad did happen, something unfortunate happened, but you can ask yourself, well, what can I learn from this situation? Because everything is a learning opportunity. So what can you learn from that situation? Would be a way to reframe your unhelpful thoughts. When we're having unhelpful thoughts, we often exaggerate or believe things are worse than what they really are. So asking these questions is going to help us see that. It's going to force us to pause and look at this from a different lens. Now we're going to practice this. There was a science test. You studied really hard for a science test, but you got a much lower grade than what you expected. Here are some thoughts that could be going through your head. I'll never be good at science. This test was totally confusing. That teacher was unfair. Those would be examples of some negative thoughts, unhelpful thoughts going through your head. Let's reframe those thoughts. And I know that on here it says to write your responses in the flow chart on your handout, but for this scenario, we're going to talk through it And then on your assignment for today, there's a flow chart that's going to look similar to this. It looks identical to the one that you guys did last week as well. So talking through this, describe the possible emotion. So I want you to think about this as I'm talking through it. So he put in a lot of time to study for a science test, and he just didn't do well. A possible emotion that he could feel is he's frustrated. Maybe you said he's sad, disappointed, upset. Okay, those could be some possible emotions. Now we have to come up with 2 unhelpful thoughts. So an unhelpful thought would be, this class is awful. I hate this class, right? That would be an unhelpful thought. Another one could be, I'm never going to get a good grade in this class. So you're thinking the worst. You're not seeing that it could get better. Now I want us to reframe our unhelpful thoughts into helpful thoughts. So possibly we could say that, sorry, I gotta let my dogs out. So possibly what we could say is that I need to learn different ways to study. And that might be something that I tell myself. Like, I worked really hard to study for this science test. I still got a bad grade. I need to find another way to study. Or I could think about, well, I know the teacher gave us this test. I know that he just wants to see what it is that we know. I could get with my teacher after class to let him know that I'm having a hard time, and maybe he can give me some ideas to help me study better. I'm going to click on the flow chart just to show you what it is that we just did out loud verbally. This is what it would look like in our flow chart that you're going to see on our assignment in a minute. So what were some helpful thoughts that you came up with? Maybe you came up with a thought that I did not think about. So one of the helpful thoughts is, I can get better at science. Maybe I need a different way of studying. The teacher was just trying to see how much we know. And again, maybe you came up with something different. So to kind of wrap things up, I want us to look at the 3 reframing questions that we discussed earlier. I'll go back here. Am I assuming something bad will happen? Am I assuming the other person was being intentionally mean? What can I learn from this situation? Those are our 3 reframing questions. Which one do you think might be the most useful for you, and why? Which one do you think that you'll use the most often, and why? So if I'm going back and looking at these, I think something that I myself would kind of reference to a lot is this second one. Am I assuming the other person was intentionally being mean? So I am a very sensitive person, and I misinterpret a lot of things that happen on a daily basis. So maybe I text my friend and she did not text me back right away. And so I think that she's ignoring me. So I'm intentionally thinking that she's ignoring me instead of thinking, I know she's really busy. She's going to get back with me when she can. Right? Or somebody might text me something and I read it and I interpret it in a way that was not meant the way that I took it as. So maybe they text something and it was like a really short response, and I'm like, like that person's trying to blow me off. When in reality, they were just in a hurry and didn't have time to, text out like a full thing. So that to me would be what I would use the most, is to not assume the other person was being intentionally mean. So I need to kind of wire my brain to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and be like, okay, that wasn't intentional. And that's not to say, guys, that some people don't do things intentionally to be mean. I'm not saying that. because there are unfortunately situations where somebody did mean to do it in a mean way. But most of the time, that's not the case. And so when we can just kind of be in that process of thinking more positively, then we're just going to be in a better place overall. All right, and the last wrap-up question is, what's a question of your own that you might ask to help reframe your unhelpful thoughts to helpful thoughts? So I know that we went over 3 different possible reframing questions, but maybe you have one on your own, or this lesson has sparked an idea of something that you can do to rewire your brain when those thoughts are happening. So I hope that you guys got something out of today's lesson. I'm going to close this screen and I'm going to take us to our assignment for today. So remember, when you guys are doing your assignment, first of all, make sure that you're on the correct one. Reframing Unhelpful Thoughts. It'll have today's date on there, October 7th. The very first thing that it wants you to do is to define the following term. And that term is reframe. So our whole entire focus today was on reframing unhelpful thoughts. So I want you to kind of think of, what do you think that vocabulary term means? If you had to define that word, what does it mean to reframe an unhelpful thought? So I did not go over a specific definition in the PowerPoint. So this is just something for you to kind of just make your own. What does it mean to reframe something? Okay, so you're kind of looking at it through a different point of view, a different perspective, however you want to word that. Then what you're going to do is, there's a scenario on here similar to the one that we discussed in the lesson. Imagine that this is happening to you. You left to go to the bathroom. When you get back to your desk, you notice that your paper is missing. What is one helpful and unhelpful thought you could have about this? So one helpful thought and one unhelpful thought. Okay, you're going to fill that out there. Then there's another activity, and this is the flowchart that we had talked about. There was a math test. Write your response in the flowchart. So you studied really hard for a math test, but scored much lower than you thought you would. In this box, you're going to type an emotion that you're feeling. You're going to have 2 unhelpful thoughts that you could have, and then 2 ways to reframe those unhelpful thoughts. Then you're going to come down here. I have listed the 3 reframing questions down here at the bottom. And the last thing that you guys are asked to do is, I want you guys to pick which one of these you think you would use the most often and why. So I had shared my example about how I choose the second one because I'm kind of sensitive and misinterpret things a lot. The last one, what is a question of your own that you might ask to reframe your unhelpful thoughts to helpful thoughts? So I appreciate you guys sticking with me and following along. I look forward to reading your all's responses. Hopefully you don't have any issues accessing this document. If you do, you can reach out to me, natalie.waddell@jefferson.kyschools.us, and I will make sure that I can grant you access. So I will be dropping the links to these in your Google Classrooms for Cult Connections, and they do get turned into your Cult Connections teacher. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. You guys have a great Wednesday.